Hello, my name is Tim Fedak. I'm the curator of geology with the Nova Scotia Museum. It's my privilege to talk briefly today to Dr. Bernard Means at Virginia Commonwealth University about a project created with Maggie Colangelo, creating a comic called Founding Monsters that features the history of the discovery of mastodons in North America.
So I'm Bernard Means. I am an anthropology professor in the School of World Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. And I also direct the Virtual Curation Laboratory, where you do a lot of 3D scanning and 3D printing of all kinds of things, including Pleistocene megafauna.
That's great. I guess that's where we overlapped, was with the mastodons that are working on here in Nova Scotia, and the great work that you've done. And I've just been so impressed with that Founding Monsters comic since I saw it, and just wanted to take a few minutes to chat with you today about this great, great comic. I've got the print version here. That's awesome. And
I need to make more, actually.
Okay. Saw that it was described as a science-friendly comic, Founding Monsters, that you created with Maggie Colangelo published in 2021, and an excellent example of what I see as merging drawing with heritage topics and history of science. And so I just wonder if you could start by explaining where the idea came from, and what is a science-friendly comic in your mind?
Sure. So the idea actually started because of this.
Okay.
This is a replica of a mastodon tooth that belonged to Ben Franklin. I happened to be in Philadelphia doing some 3D scanning, and I had just gotten back from the Western Science Center where I was scanning mastodons. So I had mastodons on my mind, and I said, "You guys have any mastodon?" And they said, "We have Ben Franklin's mastodon tooth." And so I scanned it, and then I sort of started wondering, why would Ben Franklin have a mastodon tooth? Which is how we sort of got onto this sort of whole thing. Maggie's actually she's actually finishing up her last semester at VCU, but she started volunteering for me 3 years ago, painting replicas of 3D scanned mastodon fossils from Charles Wilson Peale's first mastodon mount that I had scanned. And so we started talking, and she wants to be a comic book creator, and of course she is now a comic book creator. And she was very interested in doing sort of science-related comics or things that sort of explain things. And so we sort of hatched this idea of doing Founding Monsters. And by science-friendly, what we were trying to do with Founding Monsters was get something that would get people interested in science and using history as sort of this segue, some way of sort of bridging history and actually a little bit archaeology as well. And so the comic is written to be accessible, free to download. People can learn about history and then start getting interested in the science itself. We did a sequel that is not a narrative comic, but has short narratives in it, called Founding Monster Tales, which you can also download, that has a little bit more of the science in it, a little bit talking about the difference between mammoths and mastodons, and a little bit on giant ground sloths. And so just as a way of sort of engaging people and getting people to find out about something that I myself knew nothing about until, 3 years ago, I guess now. So, and I should say that the comic itself, the story she and I did together, but with the exception of two quotes, I think, in the comic, all of the writing is hers. Okay. She really has a gift for compressed storytelling. In fact, she had to rein me in a little bit. I wanted to have more things in there, and she's like, "No, this is what we need," and she was right. So it came together pretty well, because we were shooting for a 20-page comic. So we did a script together, and then she started doing rough sketches. But yeah, so she did rough thumbnails of everything, and then sort of try to figure out where the words would fit, and so I ended up being more of an sort of an editor on the process. I did make a few comments on, for the most part, all of the pacing is hers.
Has it met your expectations or goals, or exceeded them in some way, or what do you see as the impact of the release of the comic?
I think it hasn't quite met my full goals. I'd like to actually see it maybe trying to find a professional publisher for the comic.
Okay.
We're also trying to get it integrated more into the local school system.
Okay.
And so I have a new grant that we're working on a teacher's guide
Yes.
that would accompany it, so that teachers would be able to do lessons right away without having to sort of do any more work. I did have one teacher who actually used the comic in her middle school class, and said that during the pandemic, it was one of the few times she actually got students to sort of be engaged in the reading material because everybody was remote.
I guess it would have been a better question for Maggie, I guess, but I was looking at some of the drawings throughout the comic that convey the historical period of the time, people in certain dress or buildings. Do you know what sort of research would have gone into making those historically accurate, or was it quite a free sort of
No, Maggie did research on what would be the sort of typical clothing of the time. Some of it, there's a picture of Charles Wilson Peele in there that's actually based kind of on one of his paintings. But yeah, so she looked at what would be sort of typical of the time. So she's very good at doing that kind of research as well. Because we had everything sort of compressed, I was able to sort of like, oh yeah, these things are directly related.
Yeah.
Just the fact that like Charles Wilson Peele got interested in mastodons because he painted some bones that were also tied in with bones that were recovered from a farm that George Washington visited. And so these are like all these sort of interesting connections I hadn't really made. But I'm trying to think anything really inspired. There was one thing, and it actually ended up in Founding Monster Tales, is that Maggie actually got interested in Moses Williams, who was the enslaved servant of Charles Wilson Peele. I just sort of sometimes just leave her alone, and she wrote a 2-page comic on Moses Williams. She did the research all on her own. I didn't, and so that sparked something in her. Who is this guy, and what can we find out about him? And I think that actually, from people I've talked to in Philadelphia, they were more interested in that than they were in the Mastodon. Actually, was
Sure.
the story about Moses Williams. Maggie's actually doing an independent study. She's an environmental sciences major and commercial arts major. It's basically comic book. So she's a double major, and she's working on a 10-page comic related to basically to climate change at the end of the ice age. So we'll have an opportunity to sort of talk about some of those things in there. Hopefully.
Okay.
Well, and the Founding Monsters is part of the story of American democracy, and then having the comic free, and then having a lot of the specimens freely viewable at least. Sort of really is helping democratize things. So I sort of see that all sort of coming together. Yeah. It is exciting to be able to see these things myself and make them available to others. I'm not a paleontologist, I'm an archaeologist, but I've been dabbling quite a bit.
So thanks again, Bernard, for talking to me and sharing your insights on Founding Monsters.
And thank you for having me. So.
Okay.